Hi, everyone. So nice to see you all here as we begin another academic year at Penn and in the broader community. I'm Jeff Green, and this is a very special event. We're not only talking about an important topic about youth activism in relationship to climate policy, but it's launching a year-long series that the Andre Mitchell Center for the Study of Democracy, in partnership with the Penn Program in Environmental Humanities, is going to be holding for the next 8 months. For us at the Mitchell Center, it's a long time in coming. We have not dealt in a sustained way with the issue of climate justice in our 17-year history. We've occasionally had events, but nothing like the year that's going to unfold. I do think, given the Mitchell Center's focus on politics and democratic politics, now is an especially good time for us to be devoting this year of programming. As denialism reaches, I think, an ever greater ebb, as more and more climate change is being seen not as something that's going to happen someday over there, but right now, right here, I think the political and not just scientific stakes of the question become all the more urgent. Of course, above all, there's the political question of what should be done, what should the policy responses be. But there are other questions as well that I think, with the Mitchell Center's interest in the democracy angle, really come to the fore. Who should be the actors who most effectively can lead to changes in climate policy? A question that clearly connects to our topic for today. How can climate activism be done in a more rather than a less democratic way? And also, are there inescapable tensions between the values of a democratic society and what is needed to effectively advocate for climate change policy? These are just some of the topics we're going to explore. As I mentioned, we'll be doing so in partnership with the Penn Program in Environmental Humanities, and we're very grateful for the leadership and vision of Bethany Wiggin, who is a professor in the German department at Penn, who's the director of the Penn Program in Environmental Humanities, and who has been the leader of this initiative on climate and democracy, which is now starting today and will continue for the next 8 months. Bethany is a literary historian who uses the methods of her scholarship also to understand the challenges besetting climate and climate policy. And I just want to thank her for her cooperation over the last year and a half in not just coming up with so many subtle, insightful angles of analysis for us to pursue, but for so aptly bringing people together in collaborative work, including the people today on this panel. So thank you, Bethany. Really look forward to the year ahead.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you all for being here, and especially to our speakers today. It's really a treat to welcome you to this roundtable on youth-driven climate action, power and potential. And it's featuring, of course, 2 youth climate activists and 1 youth ally. Our moderator, my esteemed colleague, climate scientist and climate communicator, Dr. Michael Mann, will introduce them to you in just a moment. As you heard, my name is Bethany Wiggin. I direct the program in Environmental Humanities. If you'd like to learn more about that, there's some information over on the table. And as Jeff already said, today's roundtable kicks off a year-long exploration of these 2 critical terms, climate and democracy. And we'll consider them from an array of academic and activist perspectives. I hope to see you here next month on October 19th for a conversation about energy justice in a climate-changing world. When Jeff and the Andrea Mitchell Center approached me to ask about co-organizing this series, I really jumped at the chance, because not only did I get the chance to work with a terrific program committee, including Mike and Jeff and others, some of you are here, thank you so much. We also worked with colleagues from Drexel and from Princeton too. And I also got the chance to invite, and soon to hear from some of my personal heroes, including all 3 of these speakers today. And also, I got to continue the work of expanding discussion of climate change beyond techno-scientific arenas and recognizing climate as a problem that affects nearly every facet of modern society, including, of course, our forms of government. Timothy Mitchell's influential book, published 10 years ago, Carbon Democracy: Political Power in the Age of Oil, Mitchell's book taught us to examine the imbrication of energy systems with more and less democratic forms of governance. Oil, unlike its energetic predecessor, coal, turns out to be bad for democracy. In Mitchell's words, oil created a denatured political life, the central object of which, the economy, appeared capable of infinite growth. What followed was a Western democracy dependent on an undemocratic Middle East. We now live with the consequences, an impoverished political practice, incapable of addressing the crises that threaten to end the age of carbon democracy, including the carbon-fueled collapse of the ecological order. Not very optimistic. Since then, political theorists, including some of whom will join us in the spring, have theorized, among others, climate leviathan, and any number of scholars and journalists have uncovered the dark deeds of fossil companies as they work to sow disinformation and uncertainty about climate, and under cover of greenwashing, tell us that they're doing good. Unbelievably, as atmospheric carbon dioxide continues its climb, the supermajors continue to ramp up oil and gas production and annually earn record profits. As journalist Katie Worth, here in this book, and others have shown, American school kids have been fed a steady diet of science lessons authored by the American Petroleum Institute, proselytizing about the benefits of oil. Just so you know, Worth also gives grades to each of the 50 states, and maybe you can guess what Pennsylvania got. F. Yeah, F. Amidst all this bad news, youth climate activists have been insisting that governmental systems of all stripes have failed and that they must do better. Here in the US, Julia OLSON and Our Children's Trust are holding state governments accountable. As Swedish activist Greta Thunberg famously told attendees of the World Economic Forum in 2019, this is now in Greta Thunberg's voice, at places like Davos, people like to tell success stories, but their financial success has come with an unthinkable price tag. And on climate change, we have to acknowledge we have failed. All political movements in their present form have done so, and the media has failed to create broad public awareness. But Homo sapiens have not yet failed. Yes, we are failing, but there is still time to turn everything around. We can still fix this. We still have everything in our own hands. But unless we recognize the overall failures of our current systems, we most probably don't stand a chance. Greta Thunberg, of course, is hardly the only youth climate activist inspiring bold action. Youth climate activists are legion, and they are inspiring. 2 of them are in the room with us today. Maybe you're a climate activist. They need allies, and maybe that's why you're here. Last year, I got to know AMAN and ASTER through the public climate storytelling and story sharing project called My Climate Story, and there's more information about that over there as well. Sensing students and teachers' hunger for more and better climate education materials, we co-developed curriculum and documented Philadelphians' climate stories in and across 8 Philadelphia public high schools. And I know there's a lot of high school students here today, and partly for that reason, I want to end by just quoting some of these student voices. They were so inspiring for the creation of today's program. So Saeem Ross from Paul Robeson High School told us, climate change isn't just affecting the climate, it's also affecting people who have cardiovascular diseases and asthma. It's not just affecting the outside world, but my school community directly. Last year, we missed at least 4 days of school because we didn't have proper air conditioning. We had to fight as a school to receive air conditioners. Dae Taylor from Saul Agricultural High School reported, I learned that climate change changes our emotions. The climate is affecting the way my community acts as it gets hotter. I always take notice of the extreme violence on the hotter days when people that I know or that my family members know get murdered. Gianni Albaladejo from Girls High told us, I would like the world to know that we need to do more to influence politicians and the government about climate change. They do not take it as seriously as they should. Masterman student Bryson Nia Stratton said, Hearing everyone's climate stories has opened my eyes, and now I can't and won't stop seeing the effects of climate change in the news and in my day-to-day life. But I'm going to give the last word to Adele Mebus, a student with ASTER at the Academy of Palumbo. Adele's words, I think, are a rallying cry for us to support youth action on climate. She told us, "The environmental projects have taught me that there can and have been solutions. What we need to do as people is group together and carry out a plan." I think Adele is telling us that democratic forms can work to solve climate, and what we need is more of it, not less. So thanks to you for joining in this discussion today. And now over to you, Mike.
There we go. Oh, well, thank you very much. Is that projecting? Yeah. It's great to be moderating this discussion today. It's great to be here with these great youth activists and I would say one of the leaders of the youth climate movement here. I assume I was asked to moderate this panel because of my youthfulness, and so thank you very much for that. I would like to introduce our wonderful panelists today. First is ASTER CHAU. ASTER is a sophomore at Philadelphia High School, the Philadelphia High School Academy at Palumbo, as we already heard, and a 2023 Climate Hero in the PPEH WHYY My Philadelphia Climate Story program. At a 2023 Climate Story event, CHAU spoke of a double standard that adults tell children to believe in a future of endless possibilities and dreams, yet leave them scared to plan for the future because climate anxiety is real. Thank you. I look forward to hearing from ASTER. Next, we have one of our own students here at Penn. AMAN SHARMA is a Penn student, C25, and an avid wildlife photographer who in 2019 started a petition to the Indian government demanding they declare a climate emergency for the country. You can probably guess that Modi did not declare a climate emergency yet, but I'm sure you're still working on him. His petition eventually saw a ripple effect. He gathered a whopping 350,000 signatures, saw a ripple effect as it became so popular that other activists reached out to start similar campaigns in other countries, in their own countries. After unifying his movement with change.org, and 74 other petitions, he was able to gain around 1.2 million signatures calling for a climate emergency declaration in 70 different countries. My friend Bill Nye often exhorts his audience to change the world, and you've both done that here. And last but certainly not least, I'm delighted to introduce Julia OLSON, who's the founder and executive director and Chief Legal Counsel for Our Children's Trust. You've probably heard about them. After a recent ruling, Juliana versus the United States, the constitutional climate change brought by 21 Montana youth against the US government for violating their Fifth Amendment rights to life, liberty, property, and public trust resources, back on the path to trial. In the wake of the ruling, Olson said, as fires rage in the West, and we've heard those stories, we've seen the devastation, fueled by fossil fuel pollution, and there's no question about that. We can link these things definitively. Today's ruling in Montana is a game changer that marks a turning point in this generation's effort to save the planet from the devastating effects of human-caused climate chaos. This is a huge win for Montana, for youth, for democracy. As we've already heard, these are inextricable. We can't solve a problem like the climate crisis without democratic institutions, thriving democratic institutions. And for our climate, more rulings like this will certainly come, and it's a critical precedent now. It sets a precedent for other states that have similar language in their constitutions. And so I look forward to Julia's continued efforts to hold these states accountable. If you're looking for reasons for optimism, because there are lots of reasons these days for pessimism. It's easy to sort of give in to doom and despair. We're not seeing nearly as much progress at the national level as we would like to see. There is quite a bit of pessimism as we head into COP28. Questions about whether we will see the sorts of commitments we know we need to stop the construction of new fossil fuel infrastructure, phasing out fossil fuels on a rapid timeline. At a time when there's a lot of anxiety, and I see a few of my students here in the audience, and I see that anxiety among young folks, among my daughter who's 17 years old, among my students. At a time when there is reason for anxiety, we look for reasons for hope at the same time. And I see no greater reason for hope than the efforts of these youth activists and the efforts of Julia and others like her who are holding the polluters accountable and making real progress. And so thanks to our panel, I guess it is also my responsibility to get the conversation going here. So I have some questions that I wanted to start with. Oh, you guys are gonna, sorry, yes.
Okay. Wow, this never gets any less scary. Yeah, I think it's pretty fitting to start off with my climate story. I was originally born in New York, and my family has traveled from New York to Philly and back my entire life. And on these car rides, I would remember the smoke from the refineries that, especially during the winter, was so prominent in my life. And I would always lean up against the window and exhale. It was so cold, and draw a little smiley face. And I remember one drive specifically back from home, from New York back to Philly. It was super late and I really didn't want to go to school, but my mom was like, no, you have to go. I woke up the next day and I walked into elementary, and we were learning about fossil fuels and how terrible fossil fuels were and how they were killing the polar bears in the Arctic and how we should celebrate Earth Day. To me, at that age, it wasn't impactful whatsoever. It was a lesson that had no impact on my life, and I didn't see how that would damage anything in my personal life. The people I cared about, friends, family, my school even. And then I walked into my world history class, freshman year, just last year actually, and my world history teacher was teaching us about exploitation and how the climate crisis was an issue that was affecting everyone. It was something that really spoke to me because the difference between climate curriculum when it comes to polar bears and fossil fuels to the personal stakes and lives that are at risk was something that really mattered to me. It became this question of, is it just, sorry. Yeah, it was just something that opened my eyes to how normal things were and how this became our standards. And that led me to my climate hero, which was such an experience working with youth that had similar passions and dreams and cared about these issues was something that was really important to me. And I've had so many experiences and privileges to be able to work with youth, to work with other people who cared about the same issues as I did. And that really has spoken to me. And I'm so proud of all the people that I work with and the youth that have showed up in these spaces, whether that's in Sunrise, where I was able to work with over 100 students across the nation to win a Green New Deal for schools and work on how to campaign and learn these important skills of what it means to be a youth organizer, to Philly Thrive, who has already shut down an oil refinery that is in the neighborhoods of the Grace Ferry, who's in Grace Ferry. Yeah, just super impactful work. And I'm so proud of everyone who has helped me become the person that I am now. Sorry. Um, yeah, I think storytelling is super important. From It's just so personal, and the vulnerability in it is super impactful. There's bits and pieces where you resonate, and then there's other times where it's just like, wow, it's just crazy to think that people are experiencing these things. And yeah, over my like half a year of work, I've learned so much, and having to balance everything between schoolwork and activism and the clubs I'm doing is difficult. Being a youth organizer is so hard, and this pressure I feel from whether it's the adults in my life to other students, and this title of just youth activism itself is scary. Climate change is so scary to me, and being here now is also scary, but I'm also like, yeah, I'm still learning, and that's, yeah, yeah, I'm gonna pass it.
Wow. Okay. Hi, everyone. So when I was writing this, I was asked to tell people why I chose to become an activist. But I think anyone that is born into an environment that is slowly, day by day, chipping away their life expectancy is forced to be an activist. Seeing lockdowns imposed year after year after year due to pollutions and PM levels above 500, I was forced to be an activist. Seeing the birds and wildlife vanishing while the worst chemicals were being released into the atmosphere, into the rivers, I was forced to be an activist. Deadly air levels don't shock people in Delhi anymore because we've become used to it. And all of this has happened beneath our noses to the point where we have normalized pollution. We have normalized breathing deadly air. Because if we cared so much about it, we would have done something to change it. To me, the state of New Delhi today is a tragedy, and I live there. And I will continue to do so because I love my home. But that doesn't change the reality that slowly, my home is killing me. These polluting particles have been entering my bloodstream and my lungs since the moment I was born 20 years ago. According to research, Delhi residents actually will face a life expectancy reduction by 11.9 years. Let that sink in. 11.9 years. Now, I've never smoked before, but in 2022, being in Delhi in January meant that I was smoking more than 33 cigarettes every single day. And that's not all. As per the State of Global Air study, more than 116,000 infants in India died within a month of birth in 2019 because of air pollution. No baby should have to be born with microplastics found in their mother's breast milk. To me, Delhi will never be the same. The taste of the water will never be the same. The smell of the air will never be the same. The sky's color will never be the same. And honestly speaking, my body, my blood, and my lungs will never be the same. 1,000 PM levels every single year is an emergency. It's scary, it's dystopian, and it should alarm you. The fact that youngsters are having to stand up as activists shouldn't make anyone proud. I think it should make people disappointed. Imagine a system where children are having to step up, come out of school, and beg for their right to clean air and clean water and a clean environment. That story of just existing in an environment like that, waking up in the morning and only seeing gray, only having the smell of smog envelop my house, my school, my city, that is what I remember the most about my time home. And that sums up my motivation behind being what a lot of people today say, climate activist. You guys heard my bio, so you may know some of the efforts that I've been able to be part of. Something I can talk about, though, is how to get your story heard. I built a platform for sustainability conversations on Instagram called Birds of India, which has about a community of 700,000 people. And what I found the most important was the power of imagery. Wildlife photography was my way of taking people back to wet soil, to earthworms crawling over the back of a spotted deer, to black panthers and mudskippers and dwarf kingfishers. To know that you share space with these creatures, even though right now we sit in this urban construct in the middle of a university in Philadelphia, that's what fascinated most people. And I think language matters as well. You know, we've been taught all these words in school and we've been given all these classes. But what we're never taught are words of nature, the language of the land. Words like apricity, which is the warmth of a winter sun, something that big cats like tigers and lions love. Words like ombrophilus, which is a being that thrives in rain, like the mushroom. Or moonglade or spoondrift. I can go on and on about the words that we've forgotten as we've come forward with progress. But I do want to touch upon something. The climate crisis has been made by the hands of the West and inflicted into the still fresh wounds of the global South. You see, the current narrative today is how countries like India in the global South have overpopulation, which is currently impacting climate change. And that is perhaps the biggest lie that has been sold to us in mainstream media today. You ship your waste off to my country and you call it dirty. You open your factories in my country, you call it polluted. You hire children to do work in my country and you call it backward. Did you know that the carbon emissions emitted by the average American citizen are 7 times more than the average Indian citizen? In fact, an American consumes 36 times more than an Indian. The world today is messed up. You have girls being forced to skip school to fetch water in drought-stricken Africa. You have farmers committing suicide because crops have failed in India. You have maps having places wiped off because of wildfires in America. People of color, a lot of people like us who are right now here, are 75% more likely to be living in the future in polluted communities. To me, that sounds like the fundamentals of society being dislodged by the impacts of the climate crisis. Islands being submerged, cultures being lost to extinction. Even some communities of people possibly being driven to extinction. And a lot of people say we're fine. We're fine, we're doing okay, we're figuring it out. Aman, you're giving in to doomerism. But science, which most would agree with, is realism. And that, according to the UN, gives us 7 years till 2030 before we perhaps may reach a point that it makes harder and harder for us to come back from. Which means that the changes we bring now are vital. And it is not about the solution. It's never been about climate solutions because we have the science, we have the brains, and we have the people to make the changes. What we lack is the political willpower and the unanimous international support for immediate action. Are we willing to put our money where our mouths are? When we find these, my people can stop suffering and the global South can stop paying for the mistakes of the West in blood. We have carbon capture technology. We have ecological scientists ready to restore habitats. We have indigenous people ready to share ancestral wisdom about the wild. We have great minds that could basically take us back to a point where climate change wasn't something that humans were accelerating. The question is, are we ready to listen to them? Are we ready to fund them? And are we ready to make it happen in the society that we live in today? Thank you.
All right, can you hear me? Good. I think we need to let that sink in for a minute. Yeah. Truth tellers, right? Like that's what comes to mind. You make me a little teary. And thank you for making me follow the youth as opposed to go first, Bethany. So hard to do. And this is why I love representing young people, because they are truth tellers and they have such vital, important stories to tell. So I want to start just by thanking the Mitchell Center and Bethany and Mike, everyone who made this possible. It's really great to be here. I love the crowd. It's my favorite when I get to talk to a bunch of people who are younger than me as opposed to older than me. So thanks for turning out. I know you could be doing lots of things this afternoon and you're here. So thank you. And I'll just start. So Mike is a great scientist, Dr. Mann over here, but he got a few things wrong about our cases. So I'm gonna clear those up as we go, and just start by telling you a little bit. And maybe, is it okay if I stand up so I can see everybody? So I can see all of you in the back. So I founded this organization called Our Children's Trust in 2010. And what's so interesting, Aster, is the polar bear is, we share a little bit of a story about that. I was an environmental lawyer. I worked under our environmental laws like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, and I represented environmental groups for about 15 years. And then I had kids. And I have been trying to work on climate change as an environmental lawyer. And really, when I had my own kids and I looked at these little ones and I knew the future they were going to grow up in, I was like, this is a human rights issue. This is not just an environmental issue. And at the time, the polar bear was the mascot for the climate crisis. And that's what the environmental movement was using. And so Our Children's Trust was really born out of this idea that you all have a basic human right to live in a livable, healthful on a livable, healthful planet, but also livable, healthful communities and homes and bodies, right? You need to be healthy in your bodies and in your minds. And climate crisis, well, there are so many things, right? From racism to houselessness to, sexism, we could go off on the list. But the thing that's different about the climate crisis is there are irreversible things that we're facing, at least for, hundreds and hundreds of years. And we do have this shorter window in which to address it. And if we can address the climate crisis, we can also take care of a lot of other pollution issues and issues of injustice and social injustice that we face. So Our Children's Trust does one thing. We only represent children and young people. We sue governments under constitutions or other human rights laws, and we use the best available science. So we're working with the top experts, people like Dr. Mann and others, to bring the evidence into court about what's really happening and what the solution is, how we get out of this crisis. Okay. And so it's my belief, our theory of change is like, until there's justice for children and we really protect the rights of children to be safe, that we won't have justice or climate justice. And until we stabilize the climate system and we bring our Earth back into energy balance, so we're not collecting more heat than we should be because of fossil fuels, that we won't have climate justice. And until we hold governments accountable in democracy to really do what they should be doing, which is not working in favor of special interests like industry and the fossil fuel companies, but working for the people, then we won't have climate justice. And so that's what we're doing. And to give you an example of that, I'll just share with you this exciting story of what happened in Montana. So there's a case that we have been litigating for 3 years. It's called Held versus the State of Montana. It's on behalf of 16 youth. And the lead plaintiff, her name's Ricky Held, and she's a rancher from Montana. And her story is she has to work on that ranch with wildfires threatening her family's property and their business. She works in temperatures that are over 100 degrees with smoke-filled skies. And she's watching this place that she loves, that she's been born into, disappear. We represent young people like Sariel, who is a member of a tribe in Montana. And her elders only can tell creation stories when there's snow on the ground. And it's at a particular elevation in traditional places. And now they can't tell those stories when they're supposed to during the right seasons because the snow isn't falling, right? So those are just two of the stories, but every single young person we represent has a story of personal injury and harm. And what was special and different about this Montana case is after 13 years and working with hundreds of youth and bringing 25 cases, this one finally got to trial. And I just want to give a quick shout out here. There's someone in the audience, her name is Ashley. And she's a Pennsylvanian, and she runs the Mountain Watershed Association. But when she was much younger, she was one of our first plaintiffs and brought a case against the state of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And it was through working with a lot of youth over many years, we finally got to trial against a state government. And what this case was about is Montana had laws on their books that their government passed that said they basically had to favor fossil fuel activity, and they had to ignore climate change when they were doing that. So they were not allowed to look at climate change, and they had to basically approve fossil fuel projects. So they'd never denied a single permit. And their goal was to dig up as much oil and gas and coal in the state of Montana as they possibly could. And so we went to trial. We were there for 7 days. And at a trial, for those who aren't familiar as much with our legal system, that's where you get to put on your evidence. So a lot of law is like lawyers writing briefs, and we're writing about different Supreme Court opinions and sort of more complex stuff. But the trial is all about the evidence. And so 12 young people, they took the stand and they swore to tell the truth and looked at the judge, and they told their stories of how the climate crisis is harming them. We also had 10 experts take the stand and put this science forward, really explain, like, this is physics. It's not that complicated what's happening. You know, the greenhouse gases, they're trapping heat, and then all that heat causes all this chaos on the planet. So we told that story. And we brought in medical folks, pediatricians and psychiatrists, to really illuminate why children and young people have different bodies. You're not fully developed, right? If you're still growing, and most of you are still growing until you're about 26, you know, especially your brains. And so things affect young people differently. And people under 18, like ASTER, can't vote, right? Well, and I don't know if you can vote here. Not here, but in India, right? But there's a lack of political power among our youngest generation. And so lastly, what we brought forward was the hopeful part of the story, because I do want to leave you with, there is a lot of hope in it. It's what AMAN said, like, we have the technology to be completely powering our economies by wind and solar and existing hydropower. We don't even have to expand hydropower, geothermal energy. There's so much possibility, and the technology is there. We just don't have the political will. And that's why our courts in our democracy are so vital. So there's 3 branches of government, and people really pay attention to 2 of them, right? The executive branches and the legislature, and those are important. So vote and contact your representatives for sure. But the judiciary is there to make sure that the Constitution is enforced and that your rights are not diminished by the actions of your government. And so the last thing I'll say before we go into some questions is the part of the history of the climate crisis. I mean, it is a story of like ongoing colonialism. It's a story of discrimination and leaving waste in communities that are the most disadvantaged on the planet, whether it's communities in the United States or communities around the world. It's using all these places as a waste ground, right? But our government, particularly the United States, has known since the 1960s that if we kept burning fossil fuels, it would cause the climate crisis. So I was born in 71. So before I was born, our government knew that we should stop burning fossil fuels. And we have evidence of that in our Juliana versus United States case, which Dr. Mann mentioned, and that's our federal case against the US government. And the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has known, right? So the fossil fuel industry has known, but our governments have known, and yet they subsidize fossil fuels, they permit the fossil fuel activity, they allow our public lands and your state lands to be dug up so that all the fossil can be extracted. And so it's really time we start holding government accountable for protecting young people. And it's time that our constitutions and your rights to life and liberty and health and security, that those rights are applied to children. Because our country focuses on adults and adult needs and not young people. So we're trying to change all of that. And we're making a lot of progress. And so thanks for having me here.
Thanks. And my apologies, there's a lesson here when you're given bios to read, you might want to fact check them because it didn't read true to me as I was actually reading it and saying it. It's like, wait, Juliana? No, that's not Juliana. This is the Held case. So my apologies for that. And there is a lesson when you're given bios, fact check them, make sure they're right. Fact checking is critical, especially the students in the audience. Remember, don't just trust what you're given, verify. So I've got some prepared questions for our panelists. And so we'll start out actually with ASTER and AMAN. First of all, I wanted to know, and we'll start with ASTER. What do you think gets your peers and friends interested in climate change issues or activism?
Yeah, thank you for the question. When it comes to like talking about climate activism, there's this aspect where you have to make sure people know that this isn't just a small issue. They have to feel that it impacts not only them, but the people they care about, families, whether that's in Philadelphia or out. It has to seem personal because climate change is a personal issue for everyone.
Thanks, and Aman.
I'd say the same thing. I think a lot of times climate change seems like this distant situation, hypothetical reality, like both of you spoke about, right? Oh, polar bears, damn. But how does that impact you? So I think making people realize that it's hitting closer to home than a lot of people actually think of it as, that's what moves people to action.
Yeah, my colleague, Catherine Hayhoe, is a climate scientist and an evangelical Christian and a very effective climate communicator, sometimes says it's not polar bears, it's people. It's people, not polar bears. I differ with her a little bit. I say it's both. We should care about the beauty and wonder of our planet, but we should care about us as well. And so let me follow up on those questions. Would you say, and we'll go in the same order, would you say that your friends and peers are aware of the climate crisis, that they're aware of the dimensions and the threat of the climate crisis?
Yeah, my friends are starting to get annoyed by it, but it's everything I talk about. I've surrounded my entire life with like my climate activism and the work that I do, that at times they're like, this is really scary. And I definitely agree with them. Yeah, climate change is very scary and it's hard to talk about. It's not like one of those situations where you can just easily throw it out there and it's like a casual conversation because it's really serious. And to them, it can be, there are times where we need to step back and just like have time to ourselves to like, I guess, look at the whole picture. Yeah.
Yeah, Mon.
I think the youth know. I think the youth have known for a while, and I think they know what's going on. I think a lot of us young people live outside the biases and the bubbles and the mindsets that the older generation carried through with them beyond 2000s. We identify issues of equity, equality, race, and we see how those issues in a lot of times intersect with climatic issues, how climate change disproportionately impacts people of different genders, people of different races. So I do think the young people know what the issue is, but the issue there is that the young people don't have the power. So ASTER and I can take a placard and we can say, oh my God, the climate is changing, but we can't make the laws. Right. We cannot influence legislative action. We cannot make the courts take out a ruling that tries to stop fossil fuels. We can't make those laws. We're not in positions of power. And that's the gap.
Yeah, it's such a crucial point, and this is what I try to communicate to people as well. The youth climate movement, I see it as a foot in the door. It's given us a foot in the door, but the rest of us have to walk through that door, and the rest of us have to use all of the modes of influence and impact to make sure that your efforts aren't in vain. You've created an opportunity for the rest of us, but now the rest of us have to take full advantage of that opportunity. It has changed the conversation, and that sort of is a segue, I suppose, into my next question, because I can tell you what gives me hope for the future. It's you guys, but I want to know what gives each of you hope for the future.
Do you want to go first? Go for
it. Okay. Yeah, I kind of mentioned it earlier. Seeing other youth really care about the issue and showing up with this passion and drive, with this momentum, is so empowering to me. It keeps me going, because at times it's definitely I feel so burnt out with climate activism. It's a lot of work. It's this feeling of this issue that was passed on generations through generations, and now this big issue with so many different aspects has fallen into the youth's lap. And I guess what keeps me going is knowing that there's other youth in this movement, and that we're all here together, and we're going to collaborate, and we're going to make things better.
I got it. I think to me that's two-sided. One is that the earth itself, right? If you look at nature, without sounding too preachy, nature does heal, nature does regenerate. Every ecosystem works. Oh, oops. Every ecosystem works itself around the other ecosystems that they coexist with. So I think if we try to take strides, the earth will go back to what it used to be. Systems will adapt, species will evolve, but we do need to give that support first to the planet, because we're the ones that have been derailing it for so long. And the other part of it, I love it when academics and scientists like Dr. Mann here tell us that they see us as, giving them hope. I hate it when politicians say that, though, because so many times politicians say that, oh my God, you're so inspirational. You're the future. I was sitting across a union minister in India who controls a lot of big things in that country. And he was like, you are going to save us from the climate crisis. And he, with all his influence, all his power, all the cabinets under him, the reins of the nation under him, is telling me, a 20-year-old, barely college graduate, that I'm going to be the one saving the world, which I think is a way for politicians and leaders today to remove their hands off the responsibility, remove themselves from acknowledging that they are responsible for solving these problems, and passing it on to the next generation, passing it on to the youth, to the new minds. Yes.
Thanks. It's such a good point. I mean, it's so easy to sort of kick the can down the road, and this is part of the problem today with sort of techno fixes, geoengineering, carbon capture. This promise of future technology that will somehow solve the problem, too often used as an excuse for business as usual today. And so I think that what you're saying here sort of reinforces that we've got to reduce carbon emissions by 50% by the end of this decade and get them down to zero by mid-century. We're not going to do that with future technology. And the youth of the world aren't going to be in a position to make sure that that happens. And so it really does fall upon policymakers, those in positions of influence and power, to act now before we do mortgage the future for our children and grandchildren. I want to move, I've got another question for you guys, but I want to first move on to Julia and get Julia into the conversation. I want to hear more about what's going on in our keystone state of Pennsylvania here. What's in the works here?
Yeah. So there's, as I said, we've litigated a couple of cases here, and there's interest now in going back and bringing perhaps a different kind of case. And I was just refreshing myself before coming here on sort of the importance of Pennsylvania when it comes to fossil fuels and climate crisis. And I'm sure you all may know this, but you're the second largest gas producer in the country. You're the third largest coal producer. Your state is, not you, but your state is the largest source of, your largest source of energy is gas. Half of Pennsylvanians use gas to heat their homes. And Pennsylvania is the fourth largest greenhouse gas emitter in the country. So not only does Pennsylvania emit a lot of the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere that come from the US, but also controls a substantial amount of fossil fuels, right? And one of the things that's happening in the United States right now is there is some energy towards shifting electricity to clean energy and shifting our transportation systems to electric, right? So the Inflation Reduction Act, the Biden administration helped pass, is sort of infusing funding into our economy in that way. And that's good, but it's not nearly enough because there's no plan. So Bethany, you were reading, I think something you read was about needing a plan. And we have no national climate plan in this country, and we don't have enforceable deadlines and targets to decarbonize. And in addition to that, even if, like, let's say we completely electrify our energy system in the United States, we're the largest oil and gas producer in the world. The United States is the largest oil and gas producer in the world, and we are still digging everything up to export to other parts of the country, of the world, like the global south, right? So it's so important that we tackle not just our own decarbonizing our energy systems, but that we tackle the issue of keeping all our fossil in the ground, and that we support the global south economically, and also transitioning to clean energy so they can also have the energy needs that they need. So the beautiful thing about your Constitution here in Pennsylvania is Article 120, Section 27 has two really important rights in it that everyone should know about. How many people know about Article 1, Section 27?
Was Section 27 or 26?
Is it?
No.
It's 27.
No,
There goes that scientist thing. So I only saw one hand, two hands. Oh my gosh, okay, this is really exciting. So one of the rights in your Constitution that you should know about is you have the right to basically clean air, pure water, the preservation of the natural environment. That is written in your Constitution. It was put there in the 70s. It was it's very similar to Montana. So Montana and Pennsylvania were two of the first states to codify environmental rights in this country, okay? And there were some really special people, a former state senator, Franklin Curry, who helped make that happen here in Pennsylvania. And the second right is that you have the right to common ownership of public resources, public natural resources. And that common ownership is you all own it today and future generations own it with you. So people not yet born have a right to the commonly shared natural resources of your state, which also includes like the air and the water in your climate system. And those two rights are in your Constitution. And so anytime you're working on this issue or of pollution or climate crisis, invoke those rights in everything you do when you're talking to people, when you're talking to adults, when you're talking to people in positions of power, or you're speaking up in class, and tell other young people that those are your rights, okay? Really, really important. And so what young people could do in Pennsylvania is you could bring a case and you could sue your government for not protecting those two rights. Because what your state is, the Commonwealth is supposed to be doing is saying there can't be degradation to these resources and to your environment, including your air and your water. And some of the biggest threats to Pennsylvania are extreme weather events, right? Flooding, heat, but also drought, also infectious diseases. And that's not even talking about the local air pollution that comes, local air and water pollution that comes from the fossil fuel extraction and the burning of it in your state. So we're starting to talk about what the next case should look like. And if anyone's interested, you can always get in touch with us, info@ourchildrenstrust.org, or go to our website. We have a form you can fill out if you want to learn more.
So, this university was founded by Benjamin Franklin, who was an avid environmentalist. He was also a climate scientist, believe it or not. He studied the Gulf Stream. There are diagrams that he drew of the Gulf Stream, but he was an environmentalist who fought for clean air and clean water. And so that is really, here at Penn, that's a legacy that we can draw upon. This very university was founded by somebody who prioritized these issues. And I sometimes imagine what Benjamin Franklin would think about where we are today. He'd be horrified at the state of our environment. Climate change was not yet on the horizon in his times, but certainly the sort of exponential increase in carbon pollution is something that I think would shock and horrify people like Ben Franklin. And so I think Penn sort of has a unique angle here in having been founded by somebody who really prioritized environmental preservation. Let me ask another question, which is, what did you learn, for Julia, what did you learn from the Montana case that you think you could appropriate for the purpose of a potential Pennsylvania case?
Yeah, so again, the constitutions have similar provisions, and both constitutions also protect the rights of equal protection and health and safety and dignity, okay? And so what we did in Montana can really be replicated here by bringing forward all of the science that we presented over the week in Montana to show the similar harm that's happening. It's happening everywhere, but it's happening in slightly different ways. And so we can definitely replicate bringing that evidence into court, bringing the youth testimony into court as to the injuries. And in your state, solar power is a really important part of the transition, and wind. There's probably a lesser amount that's wind, but you have a lot of solar capacity. So really telling the story of what's possible in Pennsylvania to transition.
Yeah, I believe one of your experts was Mark Jacobson of Stanford, who was part of the Climate Solutions Project. I don't know if any of you have heard. Mark Ruffalo, the actor, was part of this project. And what they did was show how every single state, each state has a different mix of, renewable energy options, but every single state can reach the sorts of goals that we're talking about, 50% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. It's doable. The obstacles are not technological, they're entirely political at this point. Let me go back to our two youth participants here. And I can tell you how the question is, do you feel support for climate activism from older generations, Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, which I am, boomers. I'm not a boomer, I'm a Gen X. I just want to, And one of the things that I wonder, for example, some of the icons today, my daughter's 17 years old. She's a huge Swiftie. She went to see Taylor Swift here in Philadelphia and then went out to Pittsburgh to see her again. And one of the criticisms that's been leveled against Taylor Swift is she has this immense platform, unlike anybody else, and yet she's not using it for the defining issue of our time. I'm sort of wondering what you guys think about that. Do opinion leaders need, do cultural sort of figures, musicians, actors, actresses, do they need to be using their platform more than they are? Either order.
I think it's always great to have celebrities talk about issues that matter. The way that celebrities work is, of course, they get a lot of fame or status from the public. So giving back to that same public, talking about their health is really important. But at the same time, I don't think celebrities are the opinion makers of our time that we've made them out to be. If anything, we should be getting those scientists on those big platforms. We should be getting activists, people who've been doing groundwork and giving their opinion the weight that takes. I mean, I'd love for Taylor Swift to talk about climate change, but even Taylor Swift cannot take out the legislative action that is needed. And we did see the celebrity campaign that popped when they were telling Americans to go vote. And it actually did not have the impact that we thought it would. Given that they had such massive platforms. I think we need to think of who we're giving these platforms to, how they relate to the cause, and we need to put so much more of an emphasis on political action than just public action. That's my personal take on it.
Yeah, just adding on to that, I feel like although they do have very powerful platforms and have this way of getting out to so many different people, I personally believe that it's more empowering to hear from BIPOC people who are at the front line of climate change and are facing these issues much harder than the rest of us are. And I don't think we need to further hear more from people who are already thriving.
I have to quickly add, I'm a Swiftie too, so I might have been biased.
Well, it's, I'm reminded of the fact that the moment in recent history when climate change and global warming were most Googled, when people were looking into it, and we know that because we could see the activity online, was when Leonardo DiCaprio used his Academy Award acceptance speech to highlight the climate threat. But he did it in a natural way because it turns out the movie, The Revenant, they actually had to fly all the way to, I think, Argentina because there was no snow in Canada at the time that they were filming it. So there was a climate story. There was a climate story to be told. And actors and entertainers can be very effective storytellers. So I think that they can bring that to the table, but you're absolutely right. It shouldn't be, we need a diversity of voices when it comes to a problem like this that impacts everybody. So I think that is sort of it for our prepared questions, and we are now going to open it up to you guys, to the audience, to ask questions of our panelists. We have a microphone a roving microphone here.
We also have people participating online. So Matt's
Right.
gonna do that, and just raise your hand and I'll come with you with the microphone. If you just quickly introduce yourself first.
Hi, my name is Jayla. I'm actually a senior in high school. This is specifically for ASTER. You said that you started fighting for climate change not that long ago. I was just wondering, I'm assuming you had an interest in it before, but how did you get into becoming an activist? Was there any clubs? Where did that support come from you being a high school student, wanting to make a change to be speaking at conferences?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I remember being roles reversed. I was the one asking questions. It's definitely very scary. I like started off freshman year of high school. I went to the My Climate Story event. And just like a lot of opportunities from teachers in my school, some of them are on the Zoom right now, I believe. It started off with that, and then that led up to my environmental club, who reached out to Philly Thrive, who is an organization in South Philly, Grace Ferry area. And then that got me involved in Sunrise. It's just a lot of like different connections and like knowing people who are there to like support you. Did I answer that for you?
I was just going to ask if people, if other young folks here are interested in sort of tapping into that network, can they reach out to you?
Yeah, definitely. If you want to like come speak to me afterwards, I would like love to talk to you guys.
And can I add a couple other ideas too? So I think there are so many organizations that would love to work with youth. And so I'll just give you a couple of names. The Action for Climate Emergency, they're called ACE. They're fabulous. They have a network of like 1.2 million students across the country they work with. Another great organization is called Earth Guardians, and they've really grown some amazing climate leaders, and they work globally, but they have crews around the US. So those are just two, but even just getting in touch with like your local groups that are working on climate and pollution issues, there's probably a lot of opportunity to get involved.
I'm gonna just jump in super quickly just to show you that there's a handout for you, which is a Philadelphia climate action flowchart. And it has all kinds of organizations that you can get involved with, including some that ASTER mentioned, including some that Julia mentioned, and some others. So I'm gonna give you that one. And there's more as you leave today. Please do grab a flow chart and follow your path to climate activism. Over to you.
Thank you. My name's Rihanna, and I also just wanted to say, if you're interested in Sunrise in Philly, you can speak to Esther or me, and I'll stick around after this. We're doing some teach-ins. But the question I wanted to ask the panel is, I think something that's been really clear in this story or in this event is the power of people's stories and experiences in being affected by climate change. And I wonder, from everyone here, what do you think the relationship between that storytelling and solution finding is? Like, what should the relationship be between the people who are sharing their impacts and those who ultimately are creating the policy and implementing the laws?
I'm happy to start. I think it's really important that people who are affected and have those stories to tell also have some agency and participation in the solutions that are coming. And I think where that's most effective is on the local level. Like ultimately, there's so much that local communities will need to do as they transition, like how buildings are built or renovated, or how you're charging vehicles as we move towards EVs, and decommissioning things. There's so much to be done at the local level, and I think that's where public participation is really critical. I think at the high level of sort of where the standards being set, to me, that's a scientific issue that we need scientists saying we have to reduce emissions basically completely by 2050, and we need to have benchmarks along the way. And then we also need to protect our carbon sinks, like our forests and our wetlands, so we can draw down extra CO2, carbon dioxide, that we have in the atmosphere. So I think there are some questions that are more for scientists to really guide. And then I think how those standards get implemented in communities really requires stakeholders and public participation.
We're ready for another question then.
Hello, I'm Parth, and I'm a freshman at Penn. I'm also Swiftie, but anyways.
And a student in my class. Thank you very much.
My question is about climate anxiety. And so I have a lot of family in India who have had to change some of their habits or have had to adjust to all of the heat waves that they've been enduring recently, especially because they don't have readily access to air conditioning, and they've had to change things like eating habits. Every day in the summer, for example, they'll eat like a cold dish instead of something they'd rather have, just to kind of soothe themselves from all of the heat. So my question is, when you're approached with a community or a group of people who are like inundated by climate anxiety, what are the steps you take to kind of calm down their climate anxiety, or what are some of the tips you can give them to make them feel better about it?
I think climate anxiety is super horrible if you're just sitting and thinking about it. But a lot of times, as we've seen, a lot of these worries actually lead people to action, right? How do you take that anxiety and perhaps translate it into something that you're doing that gives you the satisfaction of knowing that you're doing your best to address the challenge at hand? I think that's the best way to reduce anxiety. Now, not everyone has to go plant a forest. Not everyone has to become the next big climate data scientist of the world, right? But I think everyone has those certain few steps that they could take in their daily lives to know that they're making that ground impact that will make sure that climate is being taken care of, is being thought of. Or when it comes to voting, if your family uses its resources to vote for the right leaders who have those climate decision-making campaigns in their voting manifesto, that's a difference that they can see. I know what climate anxiety feels like. I feel like a lot of us struggle with that, especially with just coming to college and then having an identity crisis and then being like, oh, climate change is also there. I know that can be really stressful. And of course, like you said, your family's going through the impact. But the only way to perhaps move forward, in my opinion, is to take some actions around that.
I think it's really hard when you're in the moment of the physical distress. And I completely agree, like for sort of the chronic nature of climate anxiety, I think getting involved and taking action has helped a lot of the young people I work with. But those acute moments. So I live in the West in Oregon, where we've had weeks of dangerous and hazardous air quality from all the fires that are burning. And you can't go outside. It's hot, you're trapped inside. The skies are orange and gray. Feels like an apocalypse when it's happening. And more people are experiencing that. So
we had that here in Philadelphia, the worst air quality in the world this summer.
Yeah. So I think more and more people are starting to relate to, what you spoke of about being in New Delhi and what it's like to live in kind of that suffocating circumstance. And the only thing I think, one, like meditation and mindfulness is really important to me, but also like doing things that bring joy. So, music and art. And I think it's a time when we have to come together as community and figure out ways to celebrate through music, storytelling, the joy, playing games, dancing, right? When you can, if it's not, too hot, but it's hard. So finding those things are really important as well.
Yeah, can I speak to that a little bit? Climate anxiety is definitely really scary, and like finding this balance I mentioned a little earlier with like my work and school, and like making sure I actually get an education without although it's like very important to me, I do still want to continue high school and hopefully go to college. It's scary, and learning when to be able to like step back and prioritize my own mental health, because I know that there are other people who are fighting for climate justice, that I can be able to like focus on myself and my passions besides climate change. Yeah.
We're going to take a question from online, and then I'm coming over to you.
Yes, this question comes from Frida or Frankie, who happens to be one of ASTER's teachers. So I guess she's reaching out through this medium. Her question is, what should teachers be doing to support youth climate activists? Pretend we can do anything we want. What would your dream support from teachers look like? And, you know, that could apply to college professors as well.
Hi, Anderson. Honestly, I think like your entire unit, I'm going to speak like I'm speaking to you in person, but what you've taught me has honestly, it's the whole reason why I'm here. Like, it was just so impactful, and like making sure that you like keep the connection of like, these are real people. And yes, we care about like fossil fuels and like polar bears and like the Arctic. We also want to like learn about how these are affecting people. And I feel like your class has done that for me. And I really appreciate you. It's really corny.
I just quickly add, for college professors, get a coffee chat with Dr. Bethany and Dr. Mann, and let's get some things rolling.
We'll make that happen.
My name is Kathy Barch. I'm the instructor for a class that's here, the Penn Program. So it's, first of all, thank you so much for hosting this. It's been a pleasure. Maybe I'm not, yeah, it's been a pleasure to hear, listen to all of you, and just really inspirational. And I just start watching the film on Netflix, and I can't believe you're here. I mean, it's wonderful. I recommend it to all the students. My two quick questions, I think, are maybe more for you. Just quickly, could you tell us like a little bit about Juliana versus the US and what your hopes are? And then the second question is, since our class is internationally focused and focused on Latin America, I was wondering if you could just say how maybe efforts at the international level, whether it's cases you may have seen in international courts or activists in international level, may have helped or could help, right, some of your efforts here on the ground, whether in the Montana case, Pennsylvania, or Juliana versus US. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So Juliana versus US, it's featured in, for those who don't know, there's a documentary film about this case and the 21 youth who I represent. It's called Youth v. Gov, and it's on Netflix, so you can stream it. And it's in 30 different languages, so you can share with family and friends in other countries as well. And so this case has been going for 8 years. And one of my plaintiffs just became a lawyer. So they were all under 19 when we filed the case. And I just spent time in New York with Vic Barrett, who you may have seen in the film. It was really wonderful to see him. We were up and down. So the way the courts work at the federal level, you have district courts, which is your trial court, you have the Court of Appeals, and then the Supreme Court, right? And so during the Trump administration, they were fighting really hard to get the case kicked out. And so we were bumped up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and up to the Supreme Court and back down. And it was a really long journey. And now, after going through all of that, we are back in the trial court, the district court. And she has just given us the green light to move forward to trial. So we are waiting for a trial date and hoping to put on the kind of trial we did in Montana against the US government. And the Biden administration is still fighting us. So they're trying to stop us from getting to trial. And we're really hopeful. We have a great judge, and we have a great case, and hopefully we'll get a trial date in the spring. So that's where Juliana's at. And we support cases around the world. So there have been dozens now since we launched this effort in 2010, dozens of youth climate rights cases in countries on most continents. So we have a case that's active in Uganda, trying to get to a hearing there. It keeps getting postponed for different reasons. I just found out today that I think our partners in Mexico, their case has been accepted by the Supreme Court of Mexico. Really important case. It's similar to the Juliana case. We have a case in Canada that's in the Court of Appeals against the federal government. So Canada has a charter, not a constitution. It's called a charter, and it's a charter rights case. And And then there's a really big case being argued next week in the European Court of Human Rights on behalf of Portuguese youth. And their story is also about fire and heat. And it's against 33 European Union countries. So that will be argued. They're trying to fight for their case to go forward. And then we've supported a case in India that is trying to also get a hearing date in the Supreme Court of India on behalf of youth. So those are some of the global cases that we're working on.
Thanks. Okay. Hi, my name is Allison, and I'm an international student from Hong Kong, and I'm currently a sophomore at Penn. My question is specifically for Julia. So the work you've been doing with Montana sounds wonderful. I think I was mainly wondering, in like previous cases that you've observed, what are the most commonly cited reasons why the judge would rule in favor of the state or the government?
That's a great question. So we've never lost a case on what's called the merits, right? So all of our cases that haven't gotten very far, it's because courts have found excuses to dismiss the case or say that it couldn't go forward. And so to try to simplify what can sometimes be complicated legal stuff, it's often about separation of powers. So there's 3 branches of government, and what the government will argue is climate change is a political issue, and it should be left to the executive and the legislature to deal with, because it's about our economy and it's about all these things. And that's just wrong, because anytime fundamental human rights, your fundamental constitutional rights are at stake, it's an issue for the courts. But sometimes judges have gotten that wrong and have been concerned about, wow, this is such a big political issue. But we're starting to win that argument, and Montana is a great example, because Montana's really dominated by pretty far right Republicans right now. And so they were also running up to their state Supreme Court to try to stop our trial even days before we were starting. And the Supreme Court said, nope, this is appropriate for the courts and they can go to trial. So I think we're at a tipping point now where, now that we've had that first trial, that first big win, I think other courts are going to look to Montana and start shifting their views on this issue.
Let me just briefly assert moderator's privilege and ask a follow-up. How worried are you about the Supreme Court and what they are going to do with these cases?
So the state cases, they stop at state Supreme Courts. And the Montana Supreme Court is a really fair court. We're very optimistic. They've already ruled in our favor to let us get to trial twice. And there's some really good Supreme Court precedent case law that they've issued in the past. So we feel really great about Montana. There are a lot of really good state Supreme Courts around the country. And the US Supreme Court would just deal with federal cases like the Juliana case. And, you know, to your point about Benjamin Franklin. So the founders of our country, they were climatologists, really. They were farmers. They cared a lot about the earth. They may not have cared about other issues of justice, but they did care about water and soil and air. And one of our presidents, James Madison, who drafted the Fifth Amendment to the US Constitution in 1818, he said, "The atmosphere is the breath of life, without which we all perish." And so the US Supreme Court looks to history in interpreting our Constitution. And so we've always framed these cases as really about conservative values and grounded it in the original history of the US, which is really kind of the good part of our history as opposed to the really bad part of our history.
I know we have a lot of questions still in the room, and we unfortunately don't have a lot of time. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to bundle up the questions. We'll ask three. Matt's going to ask one from online, and then I'm going to come to you and then over to you. And then we'll have you have a last say of those last three questions.
Helene asks, do you have any thoughts about how to take power back from the corporate government complex who currently have the power to make the decisions fueling our climate crisis?
Hi, I'm Aniel. I'm in Dr. Birch's class. I'm a sophomore here at Penn. My question, I guess one thing I kind of always think about is I think it's one thing to call out policymakers and call out people who make decisions as activists, and it's kind of another thing for us as a collective to reach a point where we kind of develop an intolerance for the status quo, and we kind of become intolerant of the way things are right now. And I feel like also historically, that's kind of how we've seen change come to a point, is also when a majority or a large collective, starts to become, I cannot accept the way that things are now. And I think one thing that AMAN said that really stood out to me was, these things should be alarming. My family is from Sri Lanka, and in the capital city, Colombo, whenever I'm there, we all just wear cloths over our mouths when we're outside, and we spend most of the day finding a way not to be outside. And it's just kind of how it is. And me coming from the States, it's kind of just, my grandma would be like, oh, that's just how it is, put a cloth over your mouth. And a majority of people, especially in countries that have gone through really, really extreme changes in their climate situation, have kind of just reached a point where they accept it, and it's just a part of their life, because the nature of climate change is also, it's been very gradual. And I guess my question to you is, without placing blame in the common person, without, I guess, pushing them to a point of climate anxiety, how do you kind of, push people to become, to not accept the way things are, to kind of instill an urgency in them that doesn't cause panic, but kind of allows them to be like, this isn't how things should be, I guess.
Hi, I'm a high schooler. My question is, you mentioned Taylor Swift. I'm sorry to bring her up for the third time today, but she is one of the celebrities with the greatest carbon footprint. And she, as an incredibly rich person, has a lot of control over her life and what she does. She doesn't have to take a private jet everywhere, but she does because she can. My question is, on a personal scale and for people, and on an international scale for countries, how do rich people and rich countries, how should they be held to a different standard because of the mobility that they have due to their money?
Well, you have a lot to respond to there. Take whatever piece you like. We'd love to hear from each of you to round out the evening.
Boy, those are really existential questions. So I think I'm going to try to tackle yours, and this is just my opinion. Everyone has a different opinion or theory of change. I'm someone who thinks we need to use every lever we can to deal with all these injustices and the emergency that we're in. And so I do think, from art to people demonstrating in the streets, to civil disobedience, to every kind of law lever we can use, voting, I think all of it really, really matters. And when I look at history, I am a believer that there can be smaller groups of people can really generate a lot of power and change the course of history. So it's, if you look at, so I look to law a lot, and in the time of Brown versus Board of Education is one example, only 30% of Americans supported desegregation. And it's a rare moment for our Supreme Court where they did the right thing in a unanimous opinion. But I think there's this tension between, we've had enough public support for action on climate crisis for a really long time. and we haven't been able to convince politicians. So I think there's this dance between the public and the movement and people in power and the judiciary. And the judiciary has been on the sidelines for too long. And so I think it's really, that piece is really important, but that's what I do. And I think however you can find a role, do it, because there's going to be a tipping point where we start winning this battle.
I'll just quickly jump. So to your question, I do think different nations, different people need to be held to different standards of accountability and responsibility. The people today that are fueling the climate crisis are not the people today that are facing the impacts of the climate crisis. If we place a lot of emphasis on the West, on problems like colonization, right, that I would say are the roots of climate change induced by humankind as we see today. The West is unfortunately not the part of the globe that is being impacted by climate crisis right now. When I come here back from New Delhi, I'm living a great life. I'm living a healthy life. And the moment I step off that plane, I'm met by 900 PM levels, right? So I do think it's very important to hold those two different chains of thought to very different standards of equity. And when it comes to celebrities, we should definitely not put them on a pedestal. Like you said, most people talking about climate change, be it at the World Economic Forum, be it the World Bank, even a lot of times at the UN, they flew there in a private jet. They're going to go back home in a private jet, wearing the most branded clothes that you could find on this planet. It does seem a bit preachy when we have to listen to them rather than perhaps people that lived through climate crisis or living through the climate crisis and are actually fighting against it. So do choose your heroes wisely and see where you get your information from. To your question, I think we do tend to just normalize issues when we lose hope. The biggest part about not normalize something would be to not lose hope. And I don't think, of course, like you said, we can't blame the common public, because when you've lived with one issue for 20 years and seen nothing change, you accept it. It's your reality. You don't think of it as a tunnel that you have to crawl out through anymore. You think of it as the tunnel that you just have to live in for the rest of your lives. But perhaps young people like you and I can instill that hope back in our parents and our grandparents, say that there are ways that we can raise our voices. There are ways that we can influence our community. If you're a corporate, talk to your office about being more sustainable. If you're a teacher, talk to your school. If you're a student, talk to your peers. If you're in the government, talk to the people in power. There's so many ways that you can involve yourself in ways that do challenge the status quo, but do you have the willpower? Do you have the gumption? And a lot of times, do you have the emotional and physical capacity? That depends on every single individual, and we take our own actions.
Forgot about the mic. Normalization is very scary, and like that's why I'm a strong believer of like it starts in the schools. Climate curriculum is so very important, and it instills like this mindset from the like get-go before we're like thrown out into society. We're like already going out there with this knowledge. Yeah, I like believe that we should hold on to every win, whether it's considered a small or a big one. It's important to keep this momentum going while also prioritizing like our like mental health and our needs. Yeah.
I hope that you will learn more about the climate curriculum that ASTER and others and AMAN have been developing. You can pick up some materials there. I really want to thank Mike and ASTER, AMAN, Julia. Please join me in saying thanks.